Hi, welcome to our second module on verbal de-escalation. This is our first full module of the series. We previously recorded more of a foundational video. If you would like to watch them in order, you can go find that one on Learning Stream at the ISD, but there's no reason that you can't watch this one first and then go back and watch the foundational video. The whole series is meant to be tailored to what you're interested in wanting to learn more about as far as the different areas of verbal de-escalation. So today we're focusing on self-awareness, which is really important in knowing how our own thoughts and behaviors and feelings and actions really can impact how we respond to student behavior and then how students respond to us. So like I said, this is the first of the series in addition to the foundation. So there will be more modules following this one. But before we get too far, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Stacy Hopkins-Trump. I'm a behavioral consultant in special education at the ISD, and I will let my esteemed partner introduce herself.
Hi, thank you. I am Stephanie Dye, and I'm also a behavior consultant in special ed at the Muskegon Area ISD.
All right, we're really excited to have you here today, whether you are by yourself or whether you are with a group of people, maybe at a staff meeting. Either way, we hope that this will be beneficial for you. And if you are watching this by yourself, there will also be plenty of opportunities for some self-reflection or reflecting as a group. So we're going to do some review of the foundational module 1. In fact, if you watch any of the other modules in the series, you will probably begin to recognize some of these first slides that we're going to be showing, just because we want to make those connections. When we talk about any sorts of things with behavior, specifically verbal de-escalation, we just want to understand that any of these skills that we talk about can be used at any time. We know that behavior doesn't happen in order, so we just want to make sure that we have all of these skills that we can use in our interactions, not only with students, but with each other. So starting with self-awareness is really important so we can learn more about ourselves. And so today it really is just going to be all about you and your connections with yourself and then those around you. So we're really going to be talking about some tools, and one of the biggest ones is the 4 questions that we'll be asking ourselves to bring ourselves into awareness of how things are in a current situation. And lastly, we're going to end with talking a little bit about self-care. We can't talk about self-awareness without being able to realize when we're kind of on empty and need to recharge. So that's also a very important part of self-awareness. And so we hope today you don't feel like you're being selfish by just thinking of yourself. And to start, we're going to do an I'm in, because as educators and just as people, we tend to have lots of things going on in our minds and in our heads, and it can distract us from being present, not just here focusing on this video, but just in general. So we like to share this with people. We shared it in the last video too, of how you can acknowledge all those distractions and be okay with all those things going on in your head, in our world, at work, in your family, whatever it might be. And you just give yourself permission to kind of let that go for the time being and really be able to take this time for yourself. And that's not only part of self-awareness, but that's part of self-care. So I'm going to model it for you, and then you'll have an opportunity to do it on your own. So my I'm in today, just coming back from a little bit of a break. So you may know what time of the year it is when you're watching this. It's been really hard to get back into the swing of things, feeling a little bit overwhelmed, just a lot of things on the calendar I feel I'm not completing and need to focus more on, that I keep getting pulled in different directions. And I have 2 conflicting personal things today where I'm supposed to be in 2 places at once. So I'm trying to figure out how to plan for that. And that's a little bit distracting. So other than that, I am going to let those things go right now and say that I am in. So we'd like you to now on your own or whoever you're with to do this I'm in. If you are in a group of people, just do kind of like a whip around, take 15, 20 seconds. This isn't meant to be storytelling time, but it really is just that opportunity to kind of get that thought bubble and things that are kind of going on in your head out so that you're able to clear your mind and just be in the present moment. So go ahead and pause your video and just take a few minutes to go ahead and do that. Okay, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to take a few minutes, and sometimes you don't even realize what's kind of going on in your head until you really think about it. And so that hopefully you'll be able to use that I'm in the future at meetings, or even if you're just trying to center yourself before you have to shift gears and transition into something different. So the goals of verbal de-escalation, you have to think about two different things with students as far as our interactions with them. You know, there's always those things that are going on internally, emotionally with them. We want to try and keep them at their baseline, keep them calm, reduce any stress or risk, but we also have to be aware of what's going on in the environment. You know, so many times we can see their behavior. So we oftentimes might be able to kind of know something's going on internally, but oftentimes those things are triggered by things that are going on in the environment. So we are there to help support them, both by trying to remove some of those triggers in the environment and make that safe and comfortable for them, but also to reduce those intensive emotions so that they can cope with things that are going on in their environment. And just keeping in mind that this whole process is us doing things with them, going through this process with them, not doing things to them. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a mind shift, but just keeping in mind that that's the goal of verbal de-escalation. And I know you're all thinking of those situations that you've been in with students where they're heightened and there's a lot, maybe it's loud and it's a crisis situation. And keep in mind those situations today when we're talking about self-awareness, because you're not necessarily going to walk away with, when a student starts screaming and yelling at me, how specifically to respond to that exact thing, because we're starting with that self-awareness. So when those things start to happen, the first thing you have to do is figure out, where am I at as the adult in this situation and how can I best support this child? So we will move through some of those things today and we'll get to more of those in future modules. So just reviewing a little bit about behavior, I always love talking about a student's baseline behavior because it's so individualized. We always say and think of baseline as calm, right? And you might be able to picture what you are like when you are at your baseline and your version of calm. But we know that with some of our students, their baseline behavior is heightened. Sometimes their baseline, their calm is not what we would consider a typical type of a calm. Maybe they are always kind of in that anxious mode, or think of that person, you know, that's just always going like 50 miles a minute and they always seem to be moving really, really fast. For them, that is their baseline. So keeping in mind when we talk about baseline behavior, it really is individualized for that student. Yes, in general, do we want them to be in that calm state where they can think logically and make connections with other people and be rational? Absolutely. But sometimes that baseline behavior does not look the same depending on the student. So it really is about relationships and knowing our students and knowing ourselves and what our baselines are, so we can recognize that within ourselves as well. This appeared in the last module too, and this stress model of problem behavior, don't try and memorize this and learn every piece and part of this. I think the most important part in looking at this is just keeping in mind that, you know, behavior is cyclical. It does move around. A student may appear fairly calm and at baseline one moment, and you may seem to notice an escalation, or they may walk in and the first encounter you have with them, they're escalated. They're clearly not at their baseline. And so the questions we need to ask ourselves is, okay, what can we do right now? Where are we at in the situation? What does the student need at this moment? And I think if I were to pick one of the more important parts. There's probably two. And here we've probably all been in situations with students where we can identify, yes, they've been in crisis, yes, they've escalated. But I think what we need to really pay more attention to is those triggers for that particular student, those triggering events, noticing those patterns. A lot of times we will get to know our students and we start to know those patterns and those triggers. And then as staff, what can we do to help reduce or eliminate those triggers? Because then we won't see the escalation. But again, that's a lot of learning for the staff and the students to do together, and figuring those things out. And then the recovery phase, after a crisis is that time where students and staff can learn together about those triggers and what may have caused an escalation or what may have worked to calm that student down. And the time to do that is after you've had any sort of escalation or crisis, even if it's not a huge outburst where there's something physical that happened. It doesn't have to reach that violent stage, but just learning with the student about their triggers and what their calm looks like and how they feel in these different stages, is probably the most important part of the stress model. And also recognizing yourself in here. I mean, we all have triggers throughout our day, and sometimes we may reach what we would consider our own crisis stage, and what we need to do to get to that recovery phase also as adults to then be able to support the kids. So how do we assess behavior? You don't have to be an expert in behavior. You just have to know your kids and you have to know yourself. I love this graphic because, we always talk about behavior, but sometimes what we forget to acknowledge is there's a lot of feelings underneath, right? It usually starts with a feeling and then that comes out as a behavior. And, Steph and I do a lot of work, if you've worked with us in the past, on functional behavior assessments, right? So there's what we need to shift our minds into thinking that these students aren't doing this behavior to irritate us, or most of them don't have intent behind their behavior. It's coming from a needs-based place. They're trying to get a need met and they just don't know how to do it in the right way. And I think that's how we need to look at behavior, and not only assessing those patterns, but thinking about what is the meaning behind the student's behavior. Why are they engaging in this behavior at this moment? Because I've heard many times where people will say, well, I know that child has the skill. I know they know what they're doing isn't right, but in the moment, they don't understand that what they're doing isn't the appropriate way to get someone's attention. They are just in crisis mode and they want to get their needs met. And oftentimes they have learned over time that when they engage in a certain behavior, that meets a need for them. They're not consciously thinking of that. It's just their brains are trained to go there. And it's up to us as adults to figure out that they're in that moment where we can't really reason with them. We just need to be there to support them and bring them back to that calm. And you'll see on the slide that we talk about trauma. We talk about being trauma informed a lot of times. And I think we need to go to the brain. We need to talk about students who live in toxically stressful environments, not necessarily ones that have been through like one traumatic event, but we're talking about like trauma and stress almost on a daily basis. Their baselines of their behavior, it gets reset. So they have these chemicals in their brains and their brains learn to live kind of in that dysfunction. So it's oftentimes really difficult to figure out sometimes what those triggers are or how to de-escalate a child, that's the norm for them. When we think about children and their behavior, it usually falls into kind of three different categories, right? We've got that fight, flight, or freeze. And think about some of the students that you've worked with, and try and, when you're in the situation with them, assessing that behavior, like what is going on? What need are they trying to get met right now? Are they trying to leave? Are they in that like flight mode? Are they really kind of aggressive and verbal? Are they in that fight mode? Or you'll see those students who completely just disengage from what they're doing, putting the head down on the desk, just not participating at all. Those are situations where they're in that freeze mode. And so you need to consider that at that moment in time, that student can't really learn anything new. They can't really be rational. They need you to be that person with them and helping them. So just remember that when we have those students who've been through those really traumatic, chronically stressful situations, that their brain has been altered. But the good news is our brains are very malleable. They can be changed. And the way we can change them is by modeling these behaviors and supporting them through these things and helping them learn after these crisis situations to where they feel safe. They feel safe with you. That safety feeling is a huge issue. A lot of these students exhibit these behaviors because they don't feel safe. Even though you may feel like you're providing that safe environment, we still need to work on figuring out what might be causing that child to not feel safe, and building relationships with the kids and being able to work through that with them is the first step. But also knowing how you might respond to them and knowing yourself and being able to kind of change how you respond to them depending on what they need. Again, just remember that when a behavior happens, being able to quickly think about, okay, what's going on right now in the environment? What can I do to kind of immediately remove some of those triggers? And then getting to those underlying feelings and needs when that student's back at baseline. And Steph, feel free to jump in if you have anything you want to add. So this graphic here, I think could probably, it says the effects of anger, but I think it could be probably used for any emotion as you go through the intensity of it. Even like excitement or happiness, I think could probably do the same thing. But obviously we're thinking about a child in crisis, so we're probably seeing anger and frustration. So just keep in mind, as that escalation goes up and you see that emotion get more intense, you're going to see more intense behavior. And at that moment, like I just said previously, the brain is not able to process things. So the more intensive the feeling or behavior gets, the less the student is going to be able to kind of access that cognitive functioning part of their brain, that thinking part, the logical part of their brain. And that quote on there, you'll probably hear, if you've been in a training with us before, you've probably heard, when we are at our angriest, we are at our stupidest. And it's so true. Even think of yourself as an adult, kind of what puts you over the edge. And that's the exact same thing that happens to students when they're in crisis situations. Think of those times where you are just so upset, like you can't think clearly. And that's exactly what's going on, with the student at that point in time. So, being able to walk through that with them and help label those feelings and those emotions for them is what will help them learn to be able to de-escalate to the point where once that anger starts to come down, then guess what? My cognitive functioning starts to come up and I'm able to re-engage and I'm able to process through things with a trusting, safe adult. So just keep that in mind. I love that quote. Feel free to steal it and use that whenever you want. So behavior impacts behavior. I think we've already talked a lot about this, but I think just keeping in mind that we usually start out with that thinking, like a negative sort of thought process that then turns into these negative feelings about oneself that then comes out as behavior. And we don't always know where that's coming from with that student at that moment in time, but really helping them reframe that thinking into something that's more positive and being able to cope with those triggers and those stressors in their environment. And being really aware that when I think of behavior impacting behavior, what I think about is a student exhibits a behavior and I respond a certain way. My response to them could either help maintain that negative behavior, or my response to them could help turn that behavior around, and we can work together to figure that out. I also think our behavior as adults impacts how the students are going to respond to us. It's a two-way street. What you might previously have known about a student and the way you approach situations based on previous interactions with them, that's going to really impact how you respond. So being really aware of your own feelings and thoughts and actions when approaching a situation with a student will really impact how that student responds to you. And just being very aware, is my response helping or making this situation worse right now? And we're only human. Sometimes we say or do the wrong thing, but just recognizing our own interactions with that student, how that's impacting their ability to de-escalate. And just keeping in mind that the student isn't thinking very clearly at that time. So to be able to really help co-regulate with them and bring them down to a sense of calm. So to be able to do that, we have to be calm ourselves as adults. And that's not always possible. We know that's not always possible. And we'll talk throughout today. Yeah, there may be times where as the adult, you're like, I need a break. I need to step out of this. And that also needs to be accepted and be okay. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So we have a video from Ross Greene, and many of you may have heard of him before. He's written several books, Lost at School, The Explosive Child. He really is going to talk here about your philosophy about student behavior and maybe shifting your mindset a little bit about student behavior. It's about 4 minutes long, and then we'll take a little time to process. Get to it. Oops.
I think if you're working with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular, you need a philosophy. Who is this kid? What's he about? What's he up to? If he's up to anything. Because you see, your philosophy is going to guide your actions, especially when the going gets tough. No philosophy, no guide. The most important theme of collaborative problem solving is this one. Kids do well if they can. Now, nobody ever falls off their chair at the sight of kids do well if they can. It's only an earth-shattering philosophy. If you consider a much more popular alternative philosophy that floats around out there called kids do well if they wanna. Now, kids do well if they can, and kids do well if they wanna are two completely different philosophies. And they have completely different ramifications for what you're going to do to or with this kid to make things better. Let's think about kids do well if they wanna for a second. If you've got a kids do well if they wanna mentality and you're working with a kid who's not doing well, then the reason you think he's not doing well by virtue of your philosophy is because he doesn't wanna. I've been thinking about kids do well if they wanna for a long time, and here's the conclusion I've come up with about kids do well if they wanna. It's wrong. Flat out, dead wrong. I ask myself, why would any kid not want to do well? Don't all of us do the best we can in the circumstances we find ourselves in? Well, the kids do well if they want to mentality has those questions covered with concepts like secondary gain, attention seeking, unmotivated, coercive, limit testing. We're going to have those babies put to bed by around 11 a.m. this morning. When you really think about them, they don't make much sense. When you really put them to the test, they don't make a great deal of sense. But let's say they do make sense. Even if kids do well if they wanna is right, and now you know I think it's wrong, it's narrow. Because you see, it greatly narrows the role that you can play in the life of a kid who's not doing well. Because if you think a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, I can only think of one thing for you to do, only one role for you to play in the life of this kid. Make him wanna. And we have the technology for making kids wanna. How do you make a kid wanna? You reward the behaviors you like and you punish the behaviors you don't. You give him the incentive to do well based on the belief that he didn't have the incentive to do well in the first place, and you are now in the business of making kids wanna. I sure do hope you're right about why he's not doing well, because if you're wrong and you're busy making a kid wanna, and he already does wanna, you run the risk of making things worse, or at the very least, not being as helpful as you might have wanted to be. I'm a kids do well if they can guy. I think if this kid could do well, he would do well. Something must be getting in his way. Your role just changed. Your role just changed. You've just flipped from thinking a kid isn't doing well because he doesn't wanna, and therefore thinking that your role in the life of this kid is to make him wanna, to something a lot harder, and in my experience, a lot more productive. You've just shifted to kids do well if they can, and what's your main role now? Figure out what's getting in his way. Then you can help him. You can't help him if you don't know what's getting in his way. Biggest favor you can do a challenging kid is to finally, at long last, be the person who figures out what's getting in his way. Because you see, if he's still challenging, it's a pretty surefire bet. Nobody's figured it out yet. The key theme of collaborative problem solving, the key philosophy, if you remember nothing else from everything I say, I hope remember that if this kid could do well, he would do well, because kids do well if they can.
Okay, I love his perspective and thinking about kind of shifting our mindsets around behavior. And sometimes we aren't even aware that we have a certain mindset or philosophy around behavior. So thinking about that shift from, well, kids do well if they want to kids do well if they can. And thinking about, we just want you to take a few minutes to think about what is your philosophy around student behavior, and if you're in, a group of people, understand that philosophies may be different, and we're not here to judge anybody, but we're just here to gain a better understanding of our own selves and our own beliefs around student behavior, so that we can be aware of that when we are interacting with our students. So think about, what is your philosophy, and then this is, some deeper thinking and being a little bit more aware. What might you need to change or adjust about your philosophy moving forward? So just take a few minutes and maybe jot some notes down or talk amongst yourselves, and we'll see you in a minute. All right, welcome back. We just kind of want to leave you with this quote after kind of this section where we talked a little bit more about behavior and understanding behavior. And the quote reads, "If you ever felt that some students intentionally cultivate drama in their lives, you might be right. Chaos and crisis is safer and more predictable than risking trust, love, and connection." Just keeping in mind with student behavior, they are seeking that connection. They are seeking that support. Sometimes they just don't know how to do it the right way. And I'm stealing this quote from Steph, who stole it from someone, but we need to be the calm in their chaos to provide that safety net for them. And it isn't always easy, but sometimes we are the only ones who are able to do that with them. So just keep fighting the good fight, and hopefully you'll leave with some skills and tools today that will help you better understand yourselves in relation to your students.
Awesome. So really connecting, what student behavior looks like, looking at what our philosophies are, looking at how do we have our own self-awareness when, interacting in a situation with students. So now we're going to work on, what are some of those tools? Like, how do I do this? I know I need to be more self-aware, and I know that I need to check in with myself, but how do I do that? So this is the skills building pyramid for co-regulation. So different strategies. And you saw this in our first foundational one. But this is really looking at it like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have to have that foundation in order to continue moving up the next steps. And we're making modules on each one of these steps. So we'll come together and work through those steps together. But we're on that foundation piece. And that foundation piece is that self-awareness. We have to be able to check in with ourselves and know what's going on with ourselves so that we can respond in the most therapeutic manner and be able to help that child and support them and not making things worse, and seeing how we can figure out which intervention we need to use to help de-escalate them. And when we talk about co-regulation, that's regulating with them, because if they had the skills themselves, they'd be able to do it. So our job is to regulate alongside of them. And it starts with us. Another quote we use a lot too is, no child can learn from a non-calm adult. It starts with us. We set the stage. And there's so much beauty and power and scariness and all of that, right? Like, what are you saying? So the way I walk into a situation or interact with a child can make it or break it. Yeah, it can have a huge component of how it's going to work out by the way that we interact and work with that. We have to think about ourselves and keeping ourselves in check and really looking at, what am I doing to help this situation? Am I being hurtful, helpful or hurtful, right? That's what I tell my own kids. Was that helpful or hurtful? So thinking about that and really flipping that script to be able to help us respond therapeutically. So we're going to really look at learning about ourselves, because we say that we need to be self-aware, but we have to learn about ourselves a little bit to be able to know how to be self-aware and check in. So how our behavior impacts the students. So starting off, we're going to look at knowing ourselves. So what is what I want you to do? I want you to think about an experience of how you were raised or how your behavior was managed while growing up. So whether that is what happened when you made a mistake, what type of discipline, what family involvement was there forgiveness, was there not forgiveness? Was the forgiveness quick? Was it a couple weeks away? Kind of when we're talking about philosophy, right? When watching that video of Ross Green, and Stacey talked about what's our philosophy and understanding that, it really connects to our experiences. So I want you to think about what it was like growing up for you in your household and what was going around you. I know for myself, one of the experiences that really stuck with me was this hard work ethic. My dad would always say, you get up, you do your job, you're thankful that you have a job, you don't complain, you get it done. And so all growing up, that was kind of philosophy that I had, is you always do your best. You get up, you do what you need to do, you always do your best, and you always follow through. And so that has been something that has been instilled in me, that I can find myself instilling in my own children too, of this, you do what you need to do and you always do your best. So when I think about what triggers me, it brings me to the fact of knowing that when I feel that other people aren't doing their best, I'm triggered. Or if they say they're going to do something and then don't follow through with it, or they are the ones that kind of put everything else on other people to do versus doing it themselves. So I know that that's a trigger for me. And how does that relate to my past experiences is knowing that that piece of how I was raised and those experiences that you always did that triggers me when other people don't do that. So there's that connection with it. And it looks at, how important these different paths that we've had in our lives, different, pictures or stories that we can remember that flash that have an impact on us, how that can relate to some of our triggers. So what I want you to do is I want you to take about 5 minutes and really, whether you're by yourself or you're with a group of people, I want you to think about, and you can write this down, you can discuss it, you can reflect on it. Think about an experience or how behavior was handled for you in your household and in your community or environment, and think about that. I want you to then think about what triggers you. Just in general, what is a trigger for you? Just kind of own that and name it and kind of think about that. And then I want you to look at both those things and think, how does your past experience relate to your triggers? How does our upbringing, our pieces of us relate to that? And when you're thinking, if you're struggling thinking about what specific triggers, think about even some of those physical sensations. Like what happens when you can notice that your heart starts pounding, or your stomach starts churning, or you get a headache, or your hands get sweaty, or your face gets hot and red, all of that piece. Kind of think about the physical pieces with that too, because you might not think, well, that doesn't trigger me, but it does make my body feel like that, which is another side of being, triggered as well too. So go ahead and take those 5 minutes, and I want you to look at really what is the connection between those two things. All right, welcome back. So hopefully you had some time to discuss with others or even write down your thoughts. If you're not with anybody, this is also a good, time you can have a conversation later on with somebody else and saying, hey, let's process through some of this. And what was that like for you? So it's a good activity to do as well. So next we're going to look at doing some of that personal reflection. And so we look at our life story, we look at our experiences, we look at what, maybe some of our philosophy is and what triggers us, really naming our triggers and that connection. But moving forward, looking at how it impacts our work with students. So when you think about your day-to-day work with students, and maybe it's even with staff, maybe you work more with the teachers or colleagues, and some of that too, because this can reflect with that as well. How does that personal experience, your stories, connect with how you work with others? And I really want you to think of a certain experience or time that this happened. So to reflect more personally, I would start, and it's still there, right? We're human. I would start to find myself getting very triggered when working with students or staff that weren't doing what I thought was their best. So if a staff member or colleague that I was working with were like, yup, I'm going to do this, I'm going to get this action plan done, we're going to do this, and come back around and it wasn't completed, or they pushed it off onto somebody else to do it, or they didn't do what I thought was their best, I was instantly triggered. And I could find that my interaction with them would become so negative. And it was so crazy in the beginning, before I was aware of how my personal experience and life story connected to how I worked with others. I thought I was in the right. Like, oh my gosh, this is so not fair. They aren't doing what they need to be doing. Same with students, right? The student that's like, well, I did it. And you're like, well, I know you can do better than that. That's not your best. Well, it's done, or they only do part of it, or I'll do it later on my own time. So all of these things are coming together. So when I think of certain experiences when this has happened, I have looked at where I've gotten so upset with a colleague or a student that I have ended up spending my entire evening at home after work hours ruminating and telling myself that I was right and I can't believe they did this. And, before I knew it was 4 hours had gone by, and I'm still perseverating on the social justice piece that they didn't do what they were supposed to do, and I did. And little did I know that just because that was my part of my history, part of my understanding, that it might not have been part of theirs. So it had taken a lot of time for me to reflect and understand that, while wasting so much time and energy being angry and frustrated and triggered, that I wasn't able to enjoy my actual time that I had with my family or actual time doing my job because I was so caught up in that. But realizing it was a personal reflection on me based on my experiences. So I want you to think about this for yourself. How does it impact your work with students? Do you have a philosophy of, kids don't talk back to adults? We don't swear at adults. When kids are told to do something, they do it right away. That's the way I was raised as well. So understanding that, how does that impact our philosophy and the way we look at when working with students and staff? And then also looking at kind of trying to name a certain experience or time that this has happened and you found yourself getting very frustrated. And then lastly, I want you to look at, why is this important? Why is she even telling us this? Why is it even important to think about my personal history, my personal story, my philosophy on behavior and how students and people should act? How does it affect my work? So I want you to take another 5 minutes and write this down, reflect on it, discuss it with others if you have that as well, and really focus in on, why is this important? Kind of hold on to that. So go ahead and take 5 minutes. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you were able to see some correlation, some connections, maybe even have a couple aha moments. This is the part that I miss about doing this live, is not being able to hear some of your stories and hear some of your experiences and, what some of your connections were with that. But I think the important piece is really looking at how my philosophy can drive how I respond in situations and can drive how I react to students and how I react to situations that I feel are unjust or not right, which, as we know, can make a situation worse at some points. So closing up together, I want to talk about our worldview and how this all connects, right? We're looking at our experiences, we're looking at our reflections, we're looking at our triggers, and all of that comes together and that forms our worldview. It looks at what our beliefs and perceptions are. We go to what we know. We go to, especially in stressful situations, right? And like Stacey said before, when we are ingress, we are stupidest, right? Our cognitive thinking goes down. So especially when we're in a stressful situation, we react a way that we've always done or what we've known as natural. But that sometimes doesn't always work for us or isn't the most therapeutic. So this is the part where we can start flipping our script and building those new neural pathways in our brain that allows me to pause and say, yup, I'm triggered. Yup, I was raised that this is not okay way to talk to an adult. Yup, I know this is my value and belief. But how do I take it and say, what does this situation need right now from me? So I can purposely respond and be therapeutic, help that situation. A lot of times I have to pause and say, okay, is this my value and belief or is this the student's value and belief? Because we know sometimes some of our students, it's okay to they weren't raised in the same way that might have the same philosophies as us. So we have to look at and saying, am I pushing my values and beliefs onto the students or to the other staff member? And when I reflect back on, working with those staff that I felt didn't do their best, what I realized through all of this, or for students too, what I realized through all of this is maybe that was their best. So I have to be okay of understanding everyone's always trying to do the best that they can in that moment. And I have to understand when my perceptions and beliefs and values are getting in the way of my emotions of helping a situation. and really trusting each other and trusting that we can get through each of these situations. So really keeping in check of our emotions, flipping our script, our thinking. So bringing that awareness of saying, yep, I'm triggered. What are my triggers? And how do I purposely respond in this situation that is going to be therapeutic and help support the child?
As we continue talking about our worldviews and how we grew up impacts how we might even interact with people in our jobs, obviously in our personal lives, and continuing to look at our own self-awareness, we're going to show you what's called the Johari window. And if you want more information on it, Google it, because there's a ton of information out there. It's pretty easy to understand, and I think it will make sense to you now after hearing what Steph just talked about and kind of how you got your thinking going on your own philosophy. And we're going to support this a little bit more with an activity and some things that Steph's going to do with you after this. But so you'll notice it's a window, and there are 4 panes in this window. And I like to start with the first one that's called the open, the free area. And that, think of that as like your public self. So it's what you know about yourself, but it's also known by other people. So that's like pretty open. It's things I know about myself, other people know about me. That's kind of like your public self. And so start thinking about, some of those things. I did this on my own, and it can be challenging to kind of recognize and think through some of those things that I know about myself that other people also know, and kind of making a list. And you can do that like right in the window if that's something that you want to follow up and do. It really did help me become a lot more aware of this hidden area. And the number 3 spot is what you know about yourself that others don't know. So we kind of call that our private self. And, I was trying to think of things that I know about myself that others might not, and thinking about why isn't that part of my public self? And some of it is because I may not have even realized that that was a hidden area for me, that it might not be something I've openly shared or that other people know about me, but it might not have been an intentional thing. But just asking myself questions about, well, why wouldn't I share that, or why hasn't that been shared before? So I think about number 1 is like your public self, and number 3 is kind of like your private self, only things that you know about yourself. And then we move into the blind area, which are things that you don't really recognize in yourself, but others see in you or have perceptions of you. And when I was going through this, it just triggered something for me, a very positive experience. And I can't believe I'm admitting this, but I never thought I would be working with children. I always had this idea of, I am pre-med, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to work with adults. And it's just interesting how things shift. I just never thought, I grew up as an only child. I was very social, but I never was around other children a lot. I didn't babysit a lot. So working with children just didn't seem to be part of my skill set or my repertoire. And I remember I was doing some volunteer work way back in 1996 when I was in college. And I think it was at the Boys and Girls Club. And we were doing some activities with them, but we were serving them food. And I just remember serving the food. I was talking to the kids, making jokes. We were having a lot of fun. And I remember this person who I had gotten to know a little bit through college. And she was standing next to me and she goes, "Are you going to be a teacher? Are you going to be in education? Because you are really good with kids." And it was just this moment where I was like, I never thought of myself as being good with kids or being able to interact with kids. And that really was a turning moment in my education, where I thought, yeah, maybe I can do that. I think I might be good at that. So it was kind of one of those things where she saw that in me and I really didn't, but then it became part of that open free area for me, right? It just became more important because someone recognized that in me. So I think it's not always a negative thing to have people that have perceptions of you, because sometimes we just don't see those things in ourselves. And so that's kind of where that blind area comes into play. It really is based on kind of feedback from other people, and we have to be willing to receive and kind of process through that feedback. And that last area, that unknown area, which was really intriguing to me as I was going through this. It's things that you really don't know about yourself and others don't either. It's kind of that unknown area, but I also feel like that's the area where, you know, as you build relationships with people, that area kind of becomes smaller because you do learn more about yourself through other people and just through self-reflection. So when you look at these pains, they all appear to be equal, but they really aren't meant to be equal. So the more you learn about yourself, right, that from other people too, your blind area starts to get smaller and your open area, you know, starts to get larger. The more you share of yourself with other people, that open area, you know, gets bigger. So the openness of each pain kind of depends on how well you know yourself, how much you share with other people, or how much you choose to share with other people, and asking yourself, why don't I share that with other people? And how well others know you. So it's kind of a combination of all those different things. And, you know, I look at this and I see a more self-aware person probably is more in that open, kind of free area, and even grows in that area of their private self too, and what they share out with other people, knowing that there are some personal private things that may always remain that way because of certain circumstances, and that's okay too. But just really thinking and looking at this, and, you know, if you have a lot of those blind and unknown areas, you know, that could be an indication that, you know, you aren't as self-aware, you know, as you could be. And that's okay. It's just the more self-aware you are, the more able you are to be comfortable with yourself and your interactions with other people. So just right now, because this is probably, it was newer for me, I will admit that. And I really enjoyed working through this. And I think if you give yourself an opportunity to work through this and kind of really look at areas 1 and 3, obviously those you do on your own, right? And then maybe someone that you really trust, and that you're closer to, and talking about some of those, you know, those blind areas, and getting to know yourself, and also building that relationship with that person kind of at the same time, I think would be interesting to do. But again, I think you need to be in a very safe environment, and a safe place, probably to do this with other people. I would start with yourself first, and just use this as a way to think about your own self-awareness just in a different way. And so I guess the last thing I'd like to say is, it's okay if at different times these pains get bigger and smaller, as we grow, and that's okay too. So after you're done with this video, we won't have you pause right now. Maybe take a few minutes to see what sticks out about that Johari window, and feel free to research it more. There's a lot more out there. And we'll wrap this section up with, I can't take credit for these quotes because Stephanie finds these and they're wonderful. The most important relationship you will have is not with your students, but with yourself. The care and commitment you show yourself will determine your success with your students. And that's hard for us as educators, to put ourselves first in that respect of getting to know ourselves and how we need to take care of ourselves to be able to take care of others. As educators, we always put our students first. And there have been people who will say, well, you know, self-care, or, you know, being self-aware and concentrating on yourself is a selfish thing to do. But I think there's just a lack of understanding of the importance of how self-awareness can just really bring us into more healthy relationships, not only within ourselves. We have to be healthy within ourselves first before we can make those strong connections with our students, and being able to support them. So don't let anybody tell you you're being selfish when you talk about how you watch this video. That's all about you today. That's all about your own self-awareness, because we often miss that part and wonder sometimes why we're struggling or why we aren't able to make those connections. And just sitting and thinking through some of these things, whether it's thinking about your own story or it's using the Johari window or whatever it may be that you've heard so far today, just taking some time to do that will really help all of us grow together.
It's a constant journey. That is for sure. And your self-awareness will continue to grow constantly, and that's okay. It's not something you're gonna be like, I'm completely self-aware tomorrow. It is a journey, and being open to it, I guess, is the first step for sure. So now that we have, talked about what behavior is and our philosophy on behavior, and looking at our own life stories and our triggers and our connections with that, and then the Johari window, which I love. It's fantastic. And because you're constantly growing and learning new things. And I love the aha moment when you're like, huh, that's why I do what I do, or that's why that happens, is great too. So we have you thinking about all of these things. So now we want to give you some tools that you can use in the moment. And we're going to use these 4 questions, which is part of that practice and application that you have. And I know you guys, if you watched the first video, you saw these 4 questions a little bit. So we're just going to go in depth a little bit more on each one and why it's so important. You can look at these 4 questions, and the more you use them, the quicker you're going to go through them in each situation. It becomes easier, it becomes a part of you. You'll find yourself using it in situations at the grocery store, even. Like, you find these different things of like, it's just checking with myself. And the piece of it is assessing the situation. So anytime we're in a situation with a student or with a colleague, and how do we de-escalate it, no matter what, we have to assess the situation. And the first way to assess the situation is to assess ourselves. And so we look at these 4 questions. So what am I feeling now? What does the student feel, need, or want? How is the environment affecting the student? And how do I best respond based on all of these things? So we're going to go and focus in on that first question. So this is truly that self-awareness piece. And it's that time where you pause and think, what am I feeling now? So the key with this, though, is not to say, well, I can't feel angry, even though I am angry. It's not saying to change it in that moment. It's checking in. How am I feeling now? I'm tired. I'm annoyed. I'm exhausted. I'm frustrated. Because it's just that name it to tame it, right? I can check in and understand that this is how I'm feeling. So I know what I need to do with that piece. So you can check in by checking in on your physicals. How is my body feeling right now? Is my heart pounding? Am I a little nervous? What are my thoughts? And what am I feeling? And this is going to help you be aware of your own response in a situation. Because we know if we go into a situation angry or upset or frustrated or scared, we can make the situation worse. So it's okay to have those emotions, but it's being in check to understand, yep, this is how I'm feeling, but this is how I'm going to work with it. So I want to give you like a scenario. So if, let's say, you're in your classroom and you're teaching and you have a student starts yelling, I'm not doing this work, you can't make me, throwing things on the floor. Instantly, I want you to say, what am I feeling right now? Well, I'm annoyed because I'm thinking, here we go again. Stacy's going to disrupt my entire class. Again, no learning is going to be done for anybody else. And it's going to take 25 minutes for me to get to work with her on all this. And then she's going to end up leaving the classroom anyway, disrupting everybody. So what am I feeling? I'm annoyed. I'm exhausted. I'm frustrated that I can't get through this lesson. I just wish she would listen and do what she needs to do. Right? So all of these, and I know you've all been in these situations. So put yourself, and maybe even think of your own situation that you deal with, consistently or have done, dealt with, but put yourself there and put yourself in the moment and say, what was I feeling right then? So what am I feeling? I'm checking in, I'm naming it to tame it, to know that I'm feeling this way. And sometimes in crisis situations too, when things get even more heightened, we're scared. There's a fear-based. Last time so-and-so got hurt. I don't want to get hurt. I don't want the student to get hurt. Or they eloped from the building and we lost them. Or I don't want that to happen again. So there's that scared piece in there too. So just checking in. What am I feeling right now? The next question is, what does the child or the student feel, need, or want? As Stacy said before, right, with that iceberg, that all behavior has meaning, right? It's a way of communicating their feelings and needs and wants. So we have to flip our lens and think, what is a child feel, need, or want? This is going to help me with my response. If I look at it in that way, I can help de-escalate the situation by trying to figure out what they're trying to communicate to me with this behavior. So in that same scenario, think about that student that starts yelling and I'm not doing this is stupid. So think, what does the child feel, need, or want? Well, it could be a couple different things, right? The child might not understand the task. They may feel stupid. So it's stupid. Looking at, maybe this is a subject that I don't like, or maybe I didn't get enough sleep last night and I'm just getting more and more demands put on me. Maybe I'm hungry. Maybe I'm scared. Maybe I had a rough night at home. All of these different things. What is the child trying to communicate to us? What is their feelings, need, or want? And if we can look at it in that lens, it helps us to figure out how to respond in that. Maybe the child maybe we put them with partners and they don't want to work with a partner, or maybe maybe they're working by themselves and they'd rather work with a partner or somebody help them. So trying to look at what are they trying to communicate to us. And yes, sometimes do some of the behavior that we see, and especially when a student does it daily, we're like, here we go. They're just trying to manipulate the situation again and get out of doing work. That's kind of our go-to phrase. But if we think about that iceberg and think about the behavior and saying, yep, that's what it might look like, but think about our own perspectives, right? Our own stories and our own experiences that are telling us that that's what that behavior that child is showing is illustrating, versus checking back and saying, okay, yep, that might be a me thing. I'm triggered right now because we're dealing with this every single day. What if I look in the lens of that child and look below that iceberg? What does that child need right now? Because right now, something's getting in the way, right? Children do well if they can, not if they wanna. So what skills, how do we help them meet those needs so that they can do well? The next question then on those 4 questions is, how is the environment affecting the student? So again, we're still assessing the situation, right? Walking in, what am I feeling? Checking in on myself, reflecting, what does the student feel, need, or want? So how is the environment affecting it? What can we do to manage the environment to make sure that the situation doesn't escalate more? We can modify things. Does the lights need to be dimmed? Do the lights need to be turned on? Is it too hot in here? Is it crowded? Is this assignment too long? If a child is like, okay, I'm thinking I have 45 minutes of math and I can't handle math. Well, guess what? I'm going to make a scene for 45 minutes so I don't have to do math. Is it another student sitting next to that student that's making fun or triggering that child? Do we need to move other students away? Do we need to have that student that's having the problem, do they need to go for a walk, take a break? How do we manage the environment to help get the student back to baseline, de-escalate them, and look at these different strategies to be able to help them? It could be working with a partner. It could be not working with a partner. It could be moving their seat to a quieter area. So just looking at assessing the situation, looking around, what's going on? Or are we in the hallway? Are we in the cafeteria? Are we outside? Does all of these things help increase or decrease the behavior? And so what's going on in the environment that's affecting this student in this moment? And then lastly, it comes down to, how do I best respond? So we look at all these things, right? Checking in with ourselves, figuring out what the child feel, needs, or want, what's going on in the environment. Based on these 3 things, how do I best respond? So I have to consider all these questions to say, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to purposely respond in this way to help support that child and help support the situation. And like I said, the more you practice these questions, the quicker you're going to go through your mind with them and assessing it, and just becomes part naturally for you. So even let's say a crisis is happening and you have a crisis call. On your way to the situation, you can think, even if you're running, you can think to yourself, what am I feeling now? What does the young person feel, need, or want? What's going on in the environment? How am I going to best respond? Or you walk into the situation, you assess, what am I feeling right now? What does the young person feel, need, or want? What's going on in the environment? How do I best respond? And you can play through that, and it really helps you check to have you purposely respond versus react in those situations. So next we are going to practice this, right? What I want you to do is we're going to watch this video clip. It's a short clip. And what I want you to do is I want you to put yourself in the shoes of the staff member. So don't put yourself in the shoes of the student. You are the staff member. And while you're in that role, I want you to think, what am I feeling and thinking? Why is the student behaving this way? And what should I do? So think those 3 questions. You can jot them down quick if you want to. We'll come back to it, but think about in the lens of the teacher. What am I feeling and thinking? Why is the student behaving this way? And what should I do?
Mr. Erickson. Excuse me, Andrew, are we keeping you up?
No. Yeah, I'm listening.
Good. Then you won't mind commenting on what we've been discussing.
Sure, I'd love to. In what context?
Okay, Andrew, I'll humor you. Please explain to us the corollaries and significance of Gutenberg's printing press.
Yeah, all right. But you know, I think it's only fair to mention that the Chinese, they were already experimenting with printing way back in the 15th century.
Well, that very well may be, but that's not what we're discussing now, is it?
No, you're right. I'm sorry. Okay, the printing press. Basically, that was the first time that the public had access to information. People learned how to read, the Bible got printed. Actually, I'm not sure that you covered it, but isn't that what was responsible for the Protestant Reformation?
Who do you think you're fooling, huh? Who do you think you're fooling? I have been watching you sleep through this class for 2 months now.
What'd I say? I mean, was that not correct? Because I'm...
Shut up! You know, you may think that you're smart enough to just glide through my class, but you don't care. Why should you? I mean, you already know it all. Tell me, why do you even bother showing up?
You know, I think that might be the first decent question that I've ever heard you ask.
Okay, but you do know that that the rate of...
Good, got it.
Gotta love YouTube sometimes when it just keeps
Playing. So looking at that video of that adult, so what do you think he was feeling and thinking? You could obviously tell with his body language and his tone of voice, and that he at first thought he was all like, "Oh, I caught him," got all of that, but I think he would, thinking maybe, this kid doesn't do anything in my class, just sleeps all day, and I'm frustrated and annoyed. And if he does that, then everyone thinks they're going to be able to do that, and he's not going to make me look stupid, right? You know. But I think also then when the student started rattling off all the information, that's when he got angry, because he was like, he's showing me up, and I can't look stupid in front of the rest of the class that he was here. So you're not going to disrespect me. And so I think there were some pieces of feeling some disrespect. I think there were some pieces of being angry. Maybe even the teacher was embarrassed a little bit as well with that piece. So it was feeling and thinking. Maybe then when he was thinking, why is the student behaving this way? I think he probably thought, to make me look stupid, or because he thinks he's so cool. But if I look at the iceberg version of it, it might be more, this kid just got called out in front of the rest of his class. And so he wanted to prove, to himself, like, I've got this. I'm going to show everybody up that I can do this, because this teacher's trying to make me look stupid in front of everyone too. So there's that piece. And then what should I say? What should I do? I mean, that's a lose-lose battle, because that kid walked out. Instead of thinking, like, oh, he's trying to make me look stupid in front of the class. If you would have paused and said, what am I feeling? Okay, well, I'm angry and frustrated because I feel like this kid doesn't do anything, and now he's ranking off all this information. It'd have been easier to pause and say, yep, I'm frustrated that this happens. But if I ask myself that 4 questions, what does the student feel, need, or want? Part of it could be like, dang, he must be listening. He must be learning something, because he's got the information. And in that moment, that child probably felt like he was being attacked, because he was being targeted in front of everybody else. So maybe that was why he was acting that way, because he was feeling intimidated as well. And then what was going on in the environment? Everybody was watching. In front of that whole class, everybody was watching. So everyone had to save face. And how do I best respond? I don't think he responded the best way that he should have, because the kid walked out. But if he was able to say, wow, you really do know your stuff. Thanks for participating and letting me know. Moving on, type of thing. So looking at all of those things. Stacy, do you have anything you want to add? Thoughts on that?
That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, I wish, and I think it's probably because this has probably been a pattern, right? The student has probably been disengaged or seemingly disengaged from the class, and flipping that perspective, had the teacher had the opportunity to kind of take a step back, may have been like, man, this kid obviously learned this somewhere, and this must be an interest of his. Let's push this forward and make it more of a positive thing, like not in a sarcastic way, but tell us more. Like, this seems like an interest to you. And maybe the student's been bored. Maybe the student really is interested in that. And what can I do as a teacher to move that student forward? And I think it would have been a great private conversation to have, and not push the issue in the middle of class in front of everyone, like you said, because they're both trying to one up each other at that point. And to me, it was like a perfect example sometimes of a power struggle that we get into with kids, and we lose, and he left,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think those questions though to ask yourself are so powerful. And as an adult, I need to be okay that I might not be the one saving face. I want the student to save face and feel comfortable to stay in here.
Right.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we've all been in those situations, and we've all done probably not the most appropriate piece. But the beauty of it is, if we can step back and ask ourselves these 4 questions and check in with ourselves and how we're feeling, even if feel that we are so right, because this child should not be disrespecting me in my classroom. If we pause and say, what is that going to do? Because guess what? When he's out of here, it's even worse, because he's not learning and I don't have a relationship with him anymore. I've made it worse. So in all these situations moving forward, really being able to check in and say, asking myself those 4 questions so I can respond in a best way that meets the needs of everybody in these situations. Good, great. This is, I mean, also another, if you're by yourself, awesome. But if you want to share this video with your colleagues and process through some of these things, it'd be great.
So you set this slide up perfectly well, Steph, because we pretty much have covered all of this through our conversation today, especially by watching that video. But what I found interesting is that, like you said, the more you practice those questions, the more natural it will be. You probably won't even have to think through them. But all of those questions, if you think and you look at what's on this slide, like how do I best respond? I mean, these are the answers to the questions, right? I'm looking around and what is that student, you know, how am I feeling first, and exercising that self-control over my own feelings. Like I really, you know, we can lose it later, but and vent and get support from our colleagues later. But sometimes we are the only ones there. We are the only teacher in that classroom to be able to deal with that at that moment. And just asking ourselves, okay, where am I right now, and what do I need to do to either adjust the way I'm feeling, or just acknowledging, yeah, this is the way I'm feeling right now. So that's going to have an impact on how I'm responding. And really that environmental support is huge. And even looking at that video, it's not always like removing a trigger, but it would have been better to have that conversation without all of the other kids around. And I'm not going to ask that kid to go wait out in the hallway so I can talk to them. It might be a real silent, hey, at the end of class, hey, can I talk to you for a second, and kind of have that conversation, and kind of removing the audience that way. We don't always have to remove that child or get all the other kids out, or, you know, depending on the level of severity of the situation. Yes, sometimes we need to do that, but it doesn't always have to be a you need to leave. It could be we need to go walk and talk about this, you know, if there's an opportunity to do that. But oftentimes if you're the only one, you know, sometimes we have to get a little creative. And really acknowledging how those external things can really impact a student internally, and recognizing what's going on. You never know what could have been going on with that child even earlier in the day. Maybe they just had a situation where they felt stupid in a previous situation, so they were going to make themselves feel better by really exerting their knowledge and what they know. And in turn, it may have appeared to be disrespectful to the teacher, or at least the teacher thought of that child. But really wondering, you know, why is this behavior going on? And in the middle of that conversation, it's really not the time to figure that out. It's really time to de-escalate the situation and kind of figure out what led to that later. Because oftentimes it's not even that person who might appear to be the trigger may actually not be. So just trying to figure those things out. I think the most important thing on here that we've covered a little bit, but maybe not enough, is knowing when you do need to tap out, when you are at your kind of maximum threshold for some of these things. I mean, there are days where it might be you and a particular student repeatedly having to do this with one another. Or if you're secondary, it might be that every single day this seems to happen with this child, and I'm kind of tapped out. It doesn't mean you're giving up. It doesn't mean you feel like you can't help that child. But as educators, we need to be able to recognize when we're kind of on empty and may need some other support from other people. And I think sometimes we don't want to do that because it makes us look like we don't have the skills to do our jobs, or it makes us look like we're weak. Or it makes us look like we have bad classroom management. We just can't control those kids in there, and all these different things that might go through our minds. And we aren't controlling the kids. We need to learn and grow with them. And sometimes that's modeling for them. Yep. Even adults need a break sometimes. And I know as a teacher, that's hard to do, but being able to have those, I think, systems within our schools to be able to rely on one another to do that, and not be judged that we're burned out or we can't do our jobs. We need to be able to say, I just need to tap out, or I need an extra 5 minutes, or I just need to use the bathroom and just remove myself for a second. Can you cover my classroom? And sometimes when it's with an individual student, you may know going in that you're not in the right mindset to have a particular conversation with a student, and need support with that, and that's okay. So I just think thinking about how you best respond is thinking through those 4 questions. And sometimes keep in mind that saying a little means a lot to a student. Sometimes we talk too much, and they just really need us to sit there and be with them. Even if they're screaming and yelling, we just need to sit and be with them and let them get that out and not try to intervene and say too much, because sometimes that can also escalate children. And you'll know which students respond better to which things as you get to know them over time. And they'll get to recognize that no matter what they do or what they say, that you will still, in some way, shape, or form, be with them. Even if you do need to tap out, that student's not going to think that you've given up on them. And it's a great topic of conversation to have with them. Yeah, I was really frustrated too. I needed to take a couple deep breaths. I needed to take a few minutes to myself before I was able to have that conversation, because the kid learns the same thing. They learn to say, I'm not ready yet. Like, instead of screaming and yelling and blowing up, we're modeling those skills for them. Steph, anything you want to add to that before we move on? I think this is a great time to talk now about, if you do need to tap out, what does that mean? What is that telling you? And sometimes as educators, we just keep going and going and going, and we don't recognize that we have nothing left to give. And then that's when we start feeling or noticing that we aren't as effective, or sometimes we don't notice that. We don't notice that we aren't being as effective, or we're not being as kind to ourselves or to others, because we are just simply on empty. So this quote says, self-care is giving the world the best of you instead of what's left of you. And I think that's so incredibly true. I think what happens is we wait till our tanks are empty before we realize that we're running on empty, and then we're so stressed out and everything just starts to pile up on us. When we think about self-care, and I know Stephanie and I could probably talk about this for an hour with you, but we wanted to kind of close and end this way, is that you need to practice self-care regularly, not just when you've had a bad day, or not just when you feel exhausted, because when you reach that point of exhaustion, it's really hard to come back from that. You constantly feel behind, or you just don't feel well, even physically sometimes. So make that self-care part of your day, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes of whatever might help fill you up on a daily basis. Really set you up for a positive day at work. It could be something you do before you leave the house in the morning. Mindfulness, we talk a lot about that. It might be breathing. It might be, reading a certain passage, or you might have a book of inspirational quotes for the day, or kind of setting your mantra for the day, like today's going to be a good day. Or even if you get up and say, I am going to find 5 minutes during my work day, or 2 minutes maybe, to do something for myself. And that is not a selfish thing. We need to refuel our tanks in order to kind of keep driving down the road. And if we run out of gas, we're just kind of stranded there. And it's really hard to come back from that. So self-care isn't just something that you do in reaction to something negative happening. Self-care is something that you should think of as any other, kind of make that part of your routine to really be able to help you through those stressful situations and build your resilience. Because if we just do something that's fun or good for us when we've had a bad day, that doesn't help us over time. That doesn't help us rewire our brains, right, to handle that stress. So we need to build our resilience over time. And that's by practicing those self-care routines, some of those practices on a daily basis. And don't feel bad if you get through a day and you're like, it's 10 o'clock at night and I feel like I've had zero time for myself. Don't feel bad about that. You're aware, right? You are bringing awareness to the fact that I went all day and now it's 10 o'clock at night and I haven't even thought about myself or thought about how to take care of myself, that's where self-awareness comes in. I'm aware that I need to do something about that. So just keep that in mind. We do have, depending on when you watch this, I'm going to throw this out here, monthly mindful meetups, at least during the 2021 school year. So look on Learning Stream for those, and we'll probably continue those on depending on when you're watching this video. Any and all are welcome to attend those, whether you've practiced mindfulness previously or not. It's very comfortable, laid back. You'll see Steph or I or Missy Post or Lisa Cobb appearing in some of those. So Steph, do you want to close for us today?
Sure. Yeah, and I think one of the biggest points that Stacy said is it's not selfish. Like, do it for you. And if you forget one day, let go of the judgment and plan a different intention for the next day, and it's gonna be great. So thank you for listening to us today and taking the time to learn more about self-awareness and some different de-escalation strategies, and hopefully got some tools to walk away with today. So what's next? So you need to fill out that questionnaire on the Google form that was sent to you for your sketches. So if you fill that out after watching this video, you will get 1.5 sketches. And then look for module 3 on active listening. Will be coming sometime in February, and we're hoping to do one of these each month, or as time we can get them in there and keep them fresh for you and get you some sketches and help work up that pyramid for you as well. So I think the next one is going to be Tate Reminder, Missy Post doing that one, so you're not listening to the same people each time. But again, thank you for coming and listening, and we hope that you have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Bye.